Lara's Gift by Annemarie O'Brien. Chapter 2, The Red Thief. "Don't leave me behind, Tsar!" I rushed over to Babushka, gathered the reins, and pulled myself into the saddle. I squeezed my legs hard against Babushka's sides and clucked my tongue until she fell into a quick canter. We followed Tsar through the meadow, trampling through the tall grasses in our path. Boom! I flinched and looked around, wondering from where the shot had come, relieved that help was on its way. Babushka plowed on without a flicker of her ears or a staggerer's step. Tsar, too, kept flying through the open field ahead of us, completely focused on whatever it was that had prompted the chase. "Gospodi!" I cried. A silvery red-tipped wolf popped into view. It carried a leg of something white in its mouth. One of the Count's sheep, I was sure of it. I wanted to scream, "Tsar, watch out!" but the words froze up inside me like a river does in the dead of winter. Tsar gained on the wolf, leaped into the air, and caught it off guard, landing square on the wolf's back, causing it to tumble and scramble. In the blink of an eye, the wolf quickly recovered on all fours and growled at Tsar with revenge in its eyes and bared fangs. Then it lunged straight for Tsar's throat. Tsar jumped up on his hind legs and thrust his chest forward to defend himself. Together the two stood on their back legs, fighting and butting against each other. Relentlessly they pawed and growled and snapped. Without thinking, I dismounted from Babushka and looked around for a stick or a rock among the tall grasses. All I found were pebbles and little mounds of dirt, which I grabbed and threw. I was too far away to hit the wolf. Boom! The noise startled the silvery red-tipped wolf just long enough for Tsar to disentangle himself. The hooves of a horse pounded the earth in a hurried gallop. Across the field came Alexander, riding an Orlov trotter, with his rifle pointed to the sky. Ahead of him were Bori, Bistri, and Sila, barreling forward with such swift force and determination. By the time I turned back to the wolf, it was gone. And so was Tsar. Bori, Bistri, and Sila reached me first, circling round me, their ears perked and eyes focused on the horizon for something to chase. Alexander rode up and pulled his white steed to a halt beside me. "Tsar took off after the wolf," I blurted. My lip trembled as I resolved not to cry. "You saw the wolves?" Alexander asked. "Wolves? I saw only one wolf." "They stole our sheep again." Alexander shaded his eyes with his hand. "Did you see which way they went?" "My guess is that way," I said, pointing to the crushed grasses. "I've got to find Tsar." I climbed into the saddle and nudged Babushka into a gallop behind Alexander's horse. "Ulalu! Tara! Tara!" he shouted to the dogs. We followed the trail of crushed grasses behind the trio of borzoi and came upon Tsar and the wolves beyond the hill near the woods. With jaw-crushing bites, a silver wolf attacked the carcass of a dead sheep, while Tsar held his own in a stare-down with the silvery red wolf. Bistri and Silla worked as a team and distracted the silver wolf by nipping at its hind legs, while Bori blindsided it and pierced its throat with his powerful jaws. The silver wolf wailed as Bori clamped down, and in one violent shake the wolf's neck snapped and dangled from Bori's mouth. Tsar and the silvery red wolf circled each other, waiting for the right moment to make the first move. When the smell of death hung in the air and the crying wails of the silver wolf stopped, the bigger wolf lunged for Tsar's throat and caught hold. Tsar let out a cry, yet wriggled free. The wolf pawed at its mouth and spit out chunks of white fur. "Tsar needs help!" I screamed. Alexander raised his rifle and shot into the air. Boom! The wolf bolted into the woods. Tsar chased after him until his legs buckled and he collapsed. I began to dismount. "I've got to help Tsar. Let me finish off the silver wolf first. Your father will kill me if anything happens to you." Alexander pulled out his favorite knife, the one the Grand Duke Nikolai of the Perchenko kennel had gifted to him, and guardedly approached the silver wolf. I closed my eyes. "Molodiez!" Alexander praised the dogs when he was done. When I garnered the courage to open my eyes, Alexander was wiping the knife's blade clean from the wolf's blood against his trousers, so I dismounted and hurried over to Tsar. I hugged and kissed and stroked him until I realized my hands were stained with fresh, wet blood. "Tsar's bleeding!" Alexander rushed over to us and took a closer look at Tsar's neck. He just needs a few stitches. He'll be fine. I hope so, I said in a soft voice. Don't be so glum, Alexander pointed to the Count's gold medal trio of Borzoi. Tsar's one of them now. You're right. Just then an eerie feeling came over me, as if we were being watched, although I didn't see the wolf that had gotten away. As hard as my eyes searched for it through the woods, my gut told me it was watching us. And then a lonely howl pierced the air, confirming my suspicion. We should hurry, Alexander said. Tsar will still need some medical attention. This was why Alexander and I were such good friends. Despite my being 4 years his junior, the dogs always came first. Alexander raised and lowered his hand to command Babushka to kneel. Then Alexander gave a quick nod to Tsar. Jump, boy. He's never been trained, I warned. In the absence of a sledge, injured dogs often rode atop horses to carry them home, as well as on longer hunts to keep their strength and endurance. He'll figure it out, Alexander said. He's seen other dogs do it. As if by instinct, Tsar struggled to climb onto Babushka's hindquarters. The more he dug his claws, the more Babushka whinnied, until she finally had had enough and bolted upright. Tsar slid off her and landed on his rump. I moved to help him. Don't, Larochka, Alexander cautioned. If Tsar ever expects to go on a hunt, he must learn to do this for himself. Alexander tightened his hold on Babushka's reins and repeated the hand signal. She snorted and pawed the ground with her hooves before eventually obeying. You can do it, Tsar. This time, Tsar took a few steps backward, and then in one leap he landed square on Babushka's rump, carrying his head high. Once he was settled, Alexander raised his hand and Babushka stood up. With his fingers locked together, Alexander held them out for me as a human ladder. Your turn. I too must do it myself, I said. Alexander smiled, gave me the reins, and stepped out of the way. He then made a sweeping gesture with his hand, as if I were the Tsarina of all Russia. Balhalushtia. Under a blue sky, Alexander and I rode side by side through the crushed grasses in the direction of the estate. Bori, Beastry, and Scylla ran big circles around us, their heads held high, their eyes still searching for something to chase. Tsar rested his head on my shoulder. I promised the French tutor I'd come back and finish my lessons, Alexander said. I'd much rather help you stitch up Tsar. How I wished I could learn another language. Say something in French. Like what? He asked. Anything, I suggested. Whatever comes to you. Jamais, ces chiens, frescuto, he said. Hearing Alexander speak French was magical like the moon, and just as far from the world I knew. Jamais, ces chiens, frescuto, I repeated. Perfect, he said. You have a good ear. What does it matter? I asked. I love these dogs more than anything, he answered. I would definitely have to remember these words, and repeated them in my head a couple of times. As I did so, I kept a lookout for the basket of mushrooms Zara and I had collected. Alexander noted it first and pointed. Mushrooms? I nodded. While you were studying French, I was gathering mushrooms until Zara noticed the wolf and stormed after it. Like all the other visions I had had, I wanted to tell Alexander about my vision. Holding it inside was as difficult as keeping a borzoi tethered to a lead with a leaping hare in sight. Alexander dismounted, collected the basket, and peered inside. His eyes grew big. Wow, so many! He didn't look like either one of his parents, but at the same time he was a perfect blend of both of them. His mother gave him his kind blue eyes and his porcelain complexion. He got his height and slim frame from his father, along with his thick black hair that hung to his broad shoulders in wavy curls. Alexander got back on his horse and tried to hand the basket of mushrooms to me. Keep them. I cringed at the thought of what might have happened to Tsar had Alexander not come along. When he did, Yet, I can't, he said. I knew he couldn't resist a dish prepared by the Count's head chef. Mario will cook them just the way you like them, swimming in sour cream. Not fair, you know my weakness, Larochka, he teased, but I'll accept on one condition. Alexander searched through his pockets, pulled out the hunting knife that the Grand Duke Nikolai had given to him, and put it in my hand. Without your help, I would never have caught up with the wolves. I can't take your prize knife, Sasha. I knew how much it meant to him and tried to give it back. I insist, he said. You might need it one day. Tsar nudged my elbow from behind. Even Tsar agrees with me, Alexander said. There was no point in arguing. I was outnumbered. I will cherish this gift, Sasha. Spasibo. The handle reminded me of Papa's horn, for it too had a decorative gold image of a borzoi running on it. Look, Tsar, it looks just like you. When we got closer to the estate, Alexander took the hunting horn around his neck and blew into it to inform the stable hands that we had been victorious. Soon after, celebratory bells pealed. The ding-dong clang of the stable bells made me feel important, like I was riding in a parade with the imperial family. Boris, the Count's coachman, came running out to meet us, his arms pumped and cheering our success. Did you get the ringleader? Yet it got away, Alexander answered. There should be a price on that wolf's head, Boris said. The neighboring estates have lost livestock too. We'll get the red thief, Alexander said it like it was a promise. For someone so big and gruff, with shoulders as big as a barn door, Boris had a gentle touch with the horses, but trigger his angry side and he could break horseshoes and thick iron keys. We got the silver one, I said, praising Bori with strokes along his head. It's in the field just beyond the birches, Alexander added. I'll send someone for it right away, Boris said. Tsar helped too, I made a point to say. Tsar, Boris sounded surprised. I wish Papa could have seen him, I said with pride. His neck's a bloody mess, Boris looked at Alexander. It can't be true. Of course it's true, I said with my hands on my hips. Tell him, Alexander. Lara's right, Alexander said. Boris looked down at Tsar, then threw back his head and bellowed. Don't try to make him into something he's not. He just needs training, I said in Tsar's defense. Then training he shall get, Alexander said. Training was what I had always wanted for Tsar. Now all I could think about was Tsar gripped in the red thief's mouth. And that is the end of chapter 2.